After the Israelites dwelled in Egypt for a time, Pharaoh decided to take advantage of their economic potential. He imposed taskmasters on them and subjected them to forced labor. Importantly, God had told Abraham years before that his descendants would be enslaved by another nation for 400 years. It had finally happened. The people of Israel were now slaves. The more oppressive Egypt was to the Israelites, the more they multiplied. Despite Pharaoh's mistreatment, their numbers only increased. This indicates that God was blessing them even while they were suffering. Nonetheless, the Egyptians came to fear them, and Pharaoh treated them cruelly. Pharaoh ordered that every son born to Hebrews be thrown into the Nile. With this mandate, the stage was set for Moses' ascension. God had blessed his people, which caused a problem, which caused more blessing, which caused more problems, which caused preparation for God's ultimate deliverance. This serves as a prompt that God will often allow blessings in our lives that will result in some suffering, which will lead to even greater blessings for his kingdom purposes. We must, however, be patient while he works things out. A woman from the family of Levi had a son. She saw that he was beautiful and hid him for 3 months, trusting God over Pharaoh's edict's power. When she couldn't hide him any longer, the woman threw her son into the Nile River in a basket. She hoped that in God's providence, this body of water where the babies were drowned would be a means of deliverance for her child. Miriam, the baby boy's sister, waited to see what God would do. Exodus 2:7-8. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go to get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. The baby was under threat of death one moment, and his mother was being paid by Pharaoh's daughter to raise him the next. When people follow God's kingdom agenda, he shows amazing providential care. Even Pharaoh's daughter were used by God in a remarkable provision to cover and care for a child whom God would use to bring about his kingdom purposes. When the boy was old enough, his mother gave him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She then gave him the name Moses. An Israelite child who was supposed to have been executed by royal order was now being raised in the royal household and educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. In a divine irony, the future prophet of God who would bring plagues upon Egypt and lead slaves to freedom was being nurtured right under the nose of the enemy oppressor. As he grew older, Moses witnessed his own people's oppression. Despite his advantages, Moses decided to identify with and assist the Hebrews at some point along the way. When Moses saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew one day, he slayed the Egyptian and hid his body. When he tried to break up a fight between 2 Hebrews the next day, one of them asked, "Who made you a judge over us?" The Hebrew then asked Moses if he intended to kill him in the same way that he had killed the Egyptian. And Moses became terrified when he realized his actions had been exposed. When Pharaoh finally realized what was going on, he tried to kill Moses, and that was the end of it. Moses had to flee for his life to Midian, which was located on the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba in modern Saudi Arabia. He went from a wealthy upbringing to being on the run. He had Pharaoh for a step-grandfather one moment and was being hunted like a fox the next. In his efforts to help his native people, Moses was well-intentioned but rash. This serves as a reminder to avoid doing the right thing in the wrong way. Moses required more than just secular education and stories about his ancestors, which he had most likely heard. The man required God's insight into the situation. He'd get it eventually, in God's time. In Midian, Moses came to the aid of the daughters of the priest, who is known in the Bible by several names, Reuel, Jethro, and Hobab. This father invited Moses to dinner and eventually gave him his daughter Zipporah as a wife and a result of Moses' kindness. She bore Moses a son, Gershom, and Moses went to work as a shepherd in Midian. What a case of downsizing! Moses had transitioned from being Pharaoh's protege to working as a desert herder. However, God was supernaturally preparing the deliverer of his people behind the scenes. God must sometimes bring you low in order to bring you high in order to accomplish his purpose through you. Spiritual resiliency is the key to spiritual victory. After many years, Egypt's king died. But things did not get any better for the Israelites. Their work was so difficult that they begged God for help. They were in desperate need. Take note of the link here. Their bitter bondage forced them to scream. This is sometimes exactly what it takes to get us to pray to God. Some Christians wonder why God allows them to go through such adversity. The answer could be that it forces you to turn your gaze upward and take God seriously. God heard and remembered his covenants with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of heaven and earth listened to the cries of his people. He was paying attention. Why? The answer is based on a single word: covenant. The Lord had made an agreement with Abraham to make his descendants a powerful nation and to provide them with a powerful land. This is the agreement that God promised to fulfill. The Israelites' cry was now linked to God's word of promise. Even as they cried out, God was preparing a deliverer. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Moses was 80 years old at the time. Acts 7:23. And when he was full 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. Acts 7:30. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. He is employed by his father-in-law. He had most likely come to accept this as his lot in life. But everything changed when he arrived at Horeb, the mountain of God, which is another name for Mount Sinai. The location where God would soon make a covenant with the nation of Israel. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. Moses was an 80-year-old man working for his father-in-law at the time. He had most likely come to accept this as his lot in life. But everything changed when he arrived at Horeb, the mountain of God, another name for Mount Sinai, where God would soon enter into a covenant with the nation of Israel. Acts 7:30. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. God spoke when Moses responded to what God was doing. Once Moses was attentive, God issued the following command: Remove your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. Moses was standing on a 1/4 inch of sandal sole, but in the presence of a holy God, that is excessive. He needed to be humbled. He also needed to be reminded of his origins. Man was made out of the dust from the ground. Moses then modestly connected with his poor beginnings by removing his sandals. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land in a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." Moses hid his face when he realized who was speaking to him because he was afraid to look at God. To put it another way, he took God seriously. At that point, the Lord revealed to Moses that he had witnessed the plight of his people in Egypt. He was not ignorant of their plight, but he had heard their cries. As a result, he explained he had come down to save them. However, God not only determines the ends, but he also determines the means. He was ready to rescue his people, and he told Moses how. "I am sending you to Pharaoh so that you may lead my people, the Israelites, out." At this time in his life, Moses may have thought his life was coming to an end as he spent time with the sheep. The Lord, on the other hand, was still preparing him. He gave Moses 40 years of uptown training in Egypt, followed by 40 years of wilderness training. That was all that was required to prepare this shepherd to lead the sheep of Israel out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. Of course, Moses' wilderness sojourn was also the result of his murder of an Egyptian. But God can make a miracle out of a shambles. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." By the time God chose Moses to lead his people out of Egypt, the bold and brazen man who murdered an Egyptian and expected his fellow Hebrews to look up to him had vanished. Instead of seizing the opportunity to deliver Israel, he asked God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Moses certainly didn't. He had a long list of objections to God's choice. Moses had been humbled. And take note of the Lord's response, "I will certainly be with you." God did not say to Moses, "Relax and believe in yourself." Instead, he assured him of his divine presence. Moses' greatest need, and ours as well, was not self-confidence, but God-confidence. God also revealed his plan for liberating his people here. "When you bring the people out of Egypt, you will all worship me at this mountain." In other words, God did not liberate the Israelites so they could sit around and be lazy. He was releasing them so that they could do what they were meant to do: worship Him as the only true God. When God saves you from something, He also saves you to something, Himself. Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is His name?' Then what shall I tell them?" But how would Moses persuade Israel of this? They'd want to know who signed off on his job description if he showed up and said he was supposed to be their deliverer. Moses was acting on whose authority? What is his given name? God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation.'" To this God replied, "I am who I am. Say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you. The Lord, the God of your fathers.'" The English translation of the first person singular Hebrew verb meaning to be is "I am." "I will be what I will be," or "I cause to be what I cause to be" are other possible translations. God was affirming His self-existence and self-sufficiency by describing Himself in this way. He is reliant on nothing and no one. He is the all-powerful creator and sustainer of all. This Hebrew verb is etymologically related to the name Lord. Lord represents the third-person singular form, thus He is, rather than the first-person singular form, I am. It is represented in Hebrew by 4 consonants with no vowels, Y, H, W, H. We don't know for sure how this was pronounced because Jews were afraid of pronouncing the sacred name, but it could have been Yahweh. Later, Hebrew describes adding vowels to encourage readers to say the Hebrew word Adonai, that is Lord, whenever they saw the word YHWH, leading early translators to write it Jehovah. When the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Old Testament, translated the divine name YHWH, it used the Greek word Kyrios, which means Lord. This influenced the authors of the New Testament to do the same, as well as subsequent generations of Christians and Bible translators to render the divine name in the Old Testament as Lord. Many people claim to believe in an all-encompassing God. However, Moses was to inform the Israelites that he had been sent by the one true God, the Lord, the God of their forefathers. He is the only God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as well as the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. He is the personal, all-powerful God who is responsible for everything and sovereignly directs all things to achieve His kingdom purposes. He is, despite the fact that the world is constantly changing. If Moses needed assurance that he was following and obeying the one who was sending him, he got it. Go, assemble the elders of Israel to say to them, "The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God." Moses was supposed to tell the Israelites that their God, the Lord, was well aware of their plight in Egypt and had come to deliver them to a land flowing with milk and honey. God promised that they would pay attention to what He said. Then Moses was to stand before Egypt's king and tell him to allow the people to go into the wilderness to worship the Lord. "But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed towards this people, so that when you leave you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any other woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold, and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters. And so you will plunder the Egyptians." However, God made it clear that Pharaoh would not agree to this. As a result, God would respond with miraculous displays of divine power in order to persuade the king to release Israel. The Lord would also make certain that the Israelites did not leave Egypt with nothing. In fact, after all the suffering associated with the impending plagues, the Egyptians would gladly give Israel riches just to rid themselves of them. As a result, Moses and the Israelites were to act in faith, trusting that the self-sufficient God who had revealed Himself to them would provide them with everything they could ever need. He is also everything we require. Moses answered, "What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, 'The Lord did not appear to you'?" Then the Lord said to him, "What is that in your hand?" "A staff," he replied. The Lord said, "Throw it on the ground." Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, "Reach out your hand and take it by the tail." So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. "This," said the Lord, "is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." Then the Lord said, "Put your hand inside your cloak." So Moses put his hand into his cloak, and when he took it out, the skin was leprous. It had become as white as snow. "Now put it back into your cloak," he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, "If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground." Moses was still tense. What if they don't believe me, he wondered. As a result, the Lord literally filled his hands with reasons to be confident. When he told Moses to throw his shepherd's staff on the ground, it magically transformed into a snake. When he picked it up, it transformed back into a staff. The Lord assured his servant that such miracles would persuade the people of Israel that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had appeared to him. If the Israelites did not believe this sign, God would use other supernatural signs to persuade them. Moses said to the Lord, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue." This was still insufficient for Moses. He said to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I have never been eloquent, because my mouth and tongue are sluggish. Lord, you need someone else to be your mouthpiece." Moses argued whether he had a speech impediment, was a bad public speaker, or simply didn't want to go. The Lord said to him, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord?" God's response to Moses is for all those who make excuses for their inability to obey the Lord's will. Who gave humans a mouth? Who makes someone deaf or deafeningly deafen? Isn't that I, Lord? When God told Moses to speak to Pharaoh on his behalf, God was well aware of Moses' flaws. Similarly, when he calls you to kingdom service, he is aware of your fears and flaws. In fact, this serves as a reminder that God did not choose you to serve him because he desperately needed your skills on his team. He chose you to be a reflection of his glory to the rest of the world. Consider your calling. Not many were wise from a human perspective, not many powerful, Paul told the Corinthians. Instead, God has chosen the foolish in the world to shame the wise, and the weak in the world to shame the strong, so that no one may boast in his presence. Now go, I will help you speak, and will teach you what to say. The Lord was unconcerned about Moses' lack of eloquence. He was unconcerned about Moses' resume. God had found the man he desired. Go, he promised to assist you in speaking and to teach you what to say. Ultimately, the exodus of God's people from Egypt would be dependent on God rather than Moses. All you need is God's promise to inject his heavenly presence into your earthly reality. But Moses said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He is already on his way to meet you, and he will be glad to see you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform the signs with it." All of Moses' excuses for why he shouldn't be the deliverer culminated in this final outburst. "Please, Lord, send someone else." That's when the Lord's wrath erupted. The truth had been revealed. Moses simply did not want to go. But God was not going to take no for an answer. He stated that the actual speaking would be done by Moses' brother Aaron. God spoke to Moses, Moses spoke to Aaron, and Aaron delivered the message to Pharaoh. It was time for Moses to gather his courage, put his trust in God, and begin walking. Though he resisted at first, he was destined to be God's kingdom man. Then Moses went back to Jethro his father-in-law and said to him, "Let me return to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive." Jethro said, "Go, and I wish you well." 3 things God says about himself. You ask me my name, God says. I will tell you 3 things. First, Exodus 3:14a. God said to Moses, I am who I am. He didn't say anything about his name. In effect, he said, before you worry about my name, where I rank among the many gods of Egypt, Babylon, or Philistia, and before you worry about conjuring me with my name, and even before you wonder if I am the God of Abraham, be stunned by this. I am who I am. I absolutely am. A people who are astounded by God's existence will be an unstoppable people. Second, Exodus 3:14 says, And he said, Say this to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. He has not yet given Moses a name. He is constructing a link between his being and his name. In this case, he simply substitutes the statement of his being for his name. Say, I am has sent me to you. The one who absolutely is, sent me to you. Third, Exodus 3:15. God also said to Moses, Say this to the people of Israel, The Lord, Hebrew, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, Yahweh. Finally, God reveals his name to us. In the English Bible, it is almost always translated as Lord, all caps. The Hebrew, on the other hand, is pronounced Yahweh and is based on the word for I am. So, every time we hear the word Yahweh, or the short form of Yah, which you hear every time you sing Hallelujah, praise Yahweh, or every time we see Lord in the English Bible, we should think this is a proper name built out of the word for I am. This is incredible. God gave himself a name, used over 4,000 times in the Old Testament, that makes us wonder who he is when we hear it. He most emphatically is. He is unequivocal. There are so many lessons in this story. For one, weak, low, despised, and unlikely are essential qualities God seeks in his servants, and he selects those characteristics with great care. Do you not believe me? Consider this strange list of qualifications God provided for incredibly important positions in history. First, the father and mother of God's covenant people. Married couple, was infertile and elderly. Israel's greatest king. Was to be a teenage shepherd, a musician, and a poet. Live as a fugitive for years under constant threat of assassination. 1 Samuel 20 verse 3. The lead apostle must have a background in the fishing industry and no formal theological education. The chief theologian, apologist, and missiologist of the apostles was the most zealous persecutor of Christians, Acts 8 verse 3. We may know in theory that God enjoys using weakness and brokenness. We might find it encouraging in the Bible story. We might even teach or preach about it to others. When it comes to our own qualifications, however, it is almost always an unpleasant and perplexing surprise that God wishes to highlight our flaws. That is why, like Moses, we sometimes wish God would just pick someone else for the job. However, God has a very strategic reason for this design, one that, if we accept it, will turn our flaws into sources of joy rather than shame. Moses was another of God's unusual choices. What qualifications did God require of Israel's Exodus leader and greatest Old Covenant prophet? He was a terrible public speaker. The story of Moses is inspiring, but we must put ourselves in Moses' shoes right in front of the burning bush. Would you have considered yourself qualified to confront Pharaoh and demand the release of his entire slave labor force? And when God wouldn't budge, Moses finally came right out and said it. "Oh, my Lord, please send someone else." Exodus 4:13. Please send someone else instead. This is the fearful reaction of someone who not only believes, but also knows he is too weak to do what God has assigned him to do. Yes, the response lacks faith, but it is accurate. Moses will be unable to complete the assignment in his own strength. Trembling is entirely appropriate. Have you ever had a feeling like that? But I can understand Moses' preference to wander with his flocks through the peaceful hills of Horeb rather than accept God's assignment. Lord, I am sure there are more qualified people than I am to blank. I'd really prefer to lay low in the safety of obscurity. But how would Moses persuade Israel of this? They'd want to know who signed off on his job description if he showed up and said he was supposed to be their deliverer. Moses was acting on whose authority? What is his given name? If we don't have a strong sense of inadequacy for whatever task God assigns us, we're not in touch with reality. Who in the world is sufficient for these things? 2 Corinthians 2:16. Weaknesses are required qualifications for God's servants for this very reason, to make it clear both to us and to the rest of the world that we are insufficient. God places His treasure in clay jars to demonstrate that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. 2 Corinthians 4:7. Our flaws, the things we're embarrassed about and wish we didn't have to deal with, the things we want to hide from each other and the rest of the world, the things that make us want to beg God to send someone else, those flaws are an essential part of the mission. They are a component of God's plan to reveal Himself to the world. God demonstrates His existence and rewards those who trust and seek Him through our weaknesses, not our strengths. That is why we all have flaws. They are what qualify us to serve where God places us in His kingdom, perhaps more than our strengths. Nothing teaches us prayerful dependencies like being assigned to do something we can't do without God. Humans are impressed by the full range of human abilities. God, on the other hand, is only impressed by one human strength, strong faith, because faith is a reliance on God's power. As a result, when God calls us to our various and diverse roles in His kingdom, He ensures that our callings provide ample opportunities to expose our flaws. The more we understand why, the more these occasions become occasions for joy rather than shame. The burning bush scene reveals God to the world in one of 4 visible manifestations with fire mentioned in the Bible, Exodus and 2 Thessalonians 1:8, the King James Version, which has yet to be fulfilled. Fire was also linked to a plethora of other divine manifestations. Several times throughout the book, the burning bush is mentioned. Deuteronomy 33:16, and for the precious things of the earth and fullness thereof, and for the good will of him that dwelt in the bush, let the blessings come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the top of the head of him that was separated from his brethren. Mark 12:26. And as touching the dead that they rise, have ye not read in the book of Moses, how in the bush God spake unto him, saying, I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? Luke 20:37. Now that the dead are raised, even Moses shewed at the bush, when he calleth the Lord the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Acts 7:30-31. And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight, and as he drew near to behold it, the voice of the Lord came unto him.